Dude, you're not going to believe this. You know how people always say start a business with your best friend, you'll get rich together? Yeah, don't. Biggest screw up of my life. I spent a decade grinding, man. 10 years of ramen dinners, crappy studio apartments, falling asleep on the keyboard at 3 a.m. I poured everything into building this software company from the ground up. And my so-called best friend, Ethan, was right there. Or at least, that's what I thought. We met back in college, hit it off instantly. We'd drink cheap beers in the dorms and swear we'd conquer the world together. When the company started taking shape, I gave him equity. 20% at first, then more when we brought in early funding. I thought, he's family, what could go wrong? Turns out, everything. Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you want to hear how I finally stood up for myself. It was a gray Monday morning in Chicago, cold drizzle tapping on the office windows. I was dead tired but pumped, because I'd been working on this pitch for weeks. Big investors were coming in, and this could change everything. We walk into the boardroom, long glass table, bottled water lined up, those little notepads no one ever uses. Everyone takes their seats, and before I can even open my mouth, Ethan grabs my binder. He flips it open like it's his property and starts talking. And not just talking, selling. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the future of client services. With this system, our response times will improve by 40%. My team and I have been developing this for months. My stomach dropped. That was my line. My project. Word for word, down to the chart layout. Would you have called him out right there, or stayed quiet like I did? Drop your answer in the comments. I swear, I almost shouted right there. But the investors? Man, they were leaning in, nodding, whispering. Impressive to each other. I just sat there, clenching my pen like I was going to snap it in half. After the meeting, once everyone filed out to grab their double espressos, it was just me and him. I said, Ethan, what the hell, that was my work. Why'd you pretend it was yours? He smirked, smoothed his tie and said, relax man, we're partners. Who cares whose name's on it? The company wins, we both win. I wanted to believe him. But I could see it in his eyes. This wasn't a slip, this was calculated. Things started spiraling after that. He'd strut around the office like he owned the place. Introduce me to new hires like, this is Mark, he works with me. As if I was his employee. At meetings, every other sentence was, my vision, my strategy. He was hungry for the spotlight, and I was getting shoved further into the dark. One night, I stayed late. The office quiet except for the hum of the HVAC. Ethan's laptop was open on his desk. Normally, I'd never snoop, but my gut told me something was off. I clicked. There it was. An email thread with some big-name venture capital guys from New York. Subject line, ownership proposal, confidential. I scrolled, my chest tightening with every line. He was pitching them on a deal that cut me out entirely. Talking about Ethan's leadership, Ethan's growth strategy, Ethan's company. Not one damn mention of me. I just sat there staring at the screen, fists balled up, teeth grinding. The guy that first called my brother was plotting to erase me from my own company. And right then, I knew, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. You'd think after that email I found, I'd blow everything up, right then and there. Print it out, shove it in the board's face, scream, look, he's screwing me over. But nah, I didn't, not yet. Why? Because part of me still wanted to believe we were friends. Dumb, right? 10 years of history, late-night pizzas, crashing on each other's couches. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that Ethan was straight up planning to bury me. So I stayed quiet. I waited. But Ethan? He didn't slow down. Dude went into overdrive. Next board meeting, he cut me off every time I tried to speak. Investors would ask me a question, and before I even opened my mouth, he'd slide in with, yeah, what Mark means is, like I was some intern who couldn't form a sentence. He started scheduling team updates without me. Can you believe that? My own employees were sending me calendar invites to his meetings. He'd sit at the head of the table, cracking jokes, acting like Mr. Charisma. Meanwhile, I'd walk in and feel like a stranger in the company I built. It got worse. I overheard him talking to one of our junior developers, kid named Alex, fresh out of MIT, sharp as hell. Ethan leaned over his desk, all smiles, and said, you know, between you and me, I don't think Mark's got the vision to scale this company. Stick with me, and you'll go far. That one burned. Not just because he said it, but because I saw Alex nodding like he believed it. I couldn't sleep. Every night I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling of my apartment, thinking about all the sacrifices I'd made, birthdays missed, relationships tanked, health shot to hell, all so Ethan could play CEO in a shiny suit. And the craziest part, he was good at it. The investors loved him, clients loved him. He had that slick confidence that made people trust him. Meanwhile, I was the guy buried in code and spreadsheets, the one who actually kept the engine running but never got noticed. For a while I thought maybe that was it. Maybe I'd just fade out, let him have the spotlight, but then something happened that flipped the whole thing on its head. It was a Thursday afternoon. The office was buzzing, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the usual chaos. I was passing by the conference room when I heard Ethan's voice, loud, confident. I peeked in through the glass wall. He was giving a demo to a group of potential clients. My stomach dropped when I realized what he was showing them, my prototype. The one I'd been working on in secret. He had no idea how to use it. Kept stumbling through the features, messing up commands, sweating bullets as the clients started shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. And then it happened. One of them asked a technical question, something only I knew the answer to. Ethan froze. He stammered, tried to bluff, but it was obvious he had no clue. The room went dead quiet. That's when I stepped in, couldn't help myself. I walked in, smiled, and said, "Actually, the way it works is like this." Then I ran them through the demo smooth as butter. Within 5 minutes, the clients were nodding, impressed again. I didn't look at Ethan, but I could feel the heat coming off him. The guy was fuming. After the meeting, he cornered me in the hallway. His jaw was tight, eyes burning. "What the hell was that, Mark? You trying to make me look stupid?" I just stared at him. "You didn't need my help to look stupid, man." He didn't say a word, just clenched his fists, turned, and stormed off. And that's when I knew the war had officially started. After that hallway clash, things got icy. Ethan barely looked at me, barely said 2 words unless the board was around. And when they were around, he was laying it on thick, smiling, joking, playing the visionary leader role like he was auditioning for a movie. I knew he was plotting something. I just didn't know how soon it would hit. Couple weeks later, I walk into the office, and everyone's acting weird. Heads down, whispers dying the second I pass by. My gut told me something was off. Sure enough, when I got to my desk, there was a board meeting invite on my calendar. No agenda, just emergency session. That's never good news. So I show up. Long mahogany table, board members scattered around, coffee cups steaming. Ethan's at the head of the table, looking smug as hell. He's even got a new suit on. Dark blue, probably cost more than my rent. "Thanks for joining us, Mark," he says like he's the damn king of England. "We've got some serious concerns to address." I sit down, glance around. Nobody will meet my eyes. Ethan clears his throat and starts in. "We all appreciate Mark's technical skills, of course, but there have been issues. Missed deadlines. Poor communication. Clients expressing frustration." I almost laughed. Deadlines? Communication? The guy hadn't touched a line of code in his life. But he wasn't done. And, to be blunt, I don't think Mark's leadership style is aligned with the company's future. We're scaling fast, and we need someone who can think strategically, not just tinker with the details. You ever feel the air get sucked out of a room? That's how it felt. My chest tightened. I could see exactly what he was doing, painting me as some socially awkward engineer while he strutted around as Mr. Big Picture. Then he dropped the bomb. "That's why I think we should consider restructuring, specifically moving Mark into a more advisory role. Less day-to-day control, more behind the scenes." Translation: kick me out of my own company. I wanted to blow up right there, shout, "He's lying! He's been stabbing me in the back for months!" But I didn't, because blowing up would have just proved his point. Instead, I sat back, folded my arms, and listened. Board members started chiming in hesitantly. "Well, Ethan has been more visible lately. Mark's contributions are undeniable, but..." It was like watching people slowly talk themselves into betraying me. People I'd brought in. People who'd believed in me once. Then one of them, this older guy named Collins, leaned forward. "Mark, do you have anything to say for yourself?" I looked around the table. Ethan was grinning, already tasting victory, and that's when something clicked in my head. I remembered that email. The secret ownership proposal. I still had it saved. So I smiled, just a little, and said, "Not right now, but when I do, you'll want to hear it." Ethan's grin faltered for the first time. Just a flicker, but I saw it. The board wrapped up the meeting without a decision, said we'd revisit the issue in 2 weeks. Everyone filed out, murmuring under their breath. Ethan tried to act casual, but I could tell he was rattled. And me? I walked out calm as a saint. Because I knew I had the bullet in my pocket that could blow his whole game wide open. After that board meeting, I couldn't sit still. My head was buzzing, my chest tight, but underneath all the nerves was something else. Focus. You ever feel that switch flip, where you go from panicking to planning? That was me. I went back to my apartment that night, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the email I'd found on Ethan's computer, reread it, line by line. He'd been pitching investors behind my back, offering them equity he didn't even have the right to give. He was basically selling off my work without permission. That was more than betrayal, it was fraud. I saved copies, printed hard versions too. I wasn't going to risk him accidentally deleting it if he caught on. But I needed more than one email. I needed a pattern. So I started digging, late nights logging into project archives, pulling chat logs, saving presentations. Piece by piece, a story started forming. Ethan taking credit for designs I'd built, slipping his name on patents I'd filed, even negotiating side deals with suppliers. He was sloppy but cocky enough to think no one would notice. Meanwhile, Ethan was turning up the heat at the office. Suddenly I wasn't CC'd on client emails anymore. Meetings slipped off my calendar. One day I walked into the office, and my nameplate was gone from the door. Just gone, like I'd been erased overnight. He didn't even hide it. When I asked, he smirked and said, "Oh, we're just reassigning spaces. Nothing personal." Right, nothing personal, except the part where he was staging a corporate coup. The thing is, he didn't realize I was already 2 steps ahead. The break I needed came from the unlikeliest place. Alex, that MIT grad I told you about. The kid cornered me in the kitchen one afternoon, eyes darting around like he was doing something illegal. "Hey Mark, I don't know if I should be telling you this, but Ethan's been asking me to relabel some code commits. Like, take your name off them and put his instead." I nearly dropped my coffee. "You serious?" He nodded. "Yeah. And he said if I kept quiet, there'd be a nice bonus in it for me." I just stared at him. Kid looked nervous, like he'd already said too much. But in that moment I realized something. Ethan's arrogance was going to be his downfall. He thought everyone had a price, but not everyone was willing to sell out. I told Alex, "Don't change a thing, just forward me every request he makes, word for word." The kid agreed, and just like that, I had my inside man. Over the next 2 weeks, I built a mountain of evidence. Emails, code commits, time-stamped messages, even a voice recording Alex managed to snag during one of Ethan's late-night strategy sessions. It was brutal. Ethan straight up bragging about how he was going to push me out, then spin the story to make it look like I'd stepped down. I didn't rush it. I kept my poker face, showed up to work, sat through meetings, nodded at his fake charm. Inside, though, I was waiting for the perfect moment. And then it came, the follow-up board meeting, the one where they were supposed to decide my fate. I walked into that room with a folder tucked under my arm. Ethan was already there, laughing with a couple of board members, flashing that fake smile of his. He didn't even glance my way. The meeting kicked off, and, surprise, Ethan went straight for the jugular. "Look everyone, we can't keep ignoring the elephant in the room. Mark's contributions have been minimal, and honestly, his presence has become a liability. I think it's time we move forward without him in an operational role." He leaned back, all confident, like the vote was already in the bag. That's when I slid my folder onto the table. "What would you do if you had the proof but the whole room was against you? I'll show you exactly what I did." "Before you decide anything," I said, my voice steady, "I think you should take a look at this." Boardroom felt colder that day, like someone cranked the AC just to make people shiver. I opened the folder, slid copies to each member and kept one for myself so my hands had something to hold. "Start with page 1, I said. "That's an email chain between Ethan and Vantage Capital. You'll see he's offering equity he doesn't own, and you'll notice my name never appears, even though the assets listed are my work." Collins adjusted his glasses. A couple folks leaned forward. Paper rustled. Ethan smiled like it was all a misunderstanding he'd clear up with a wink. He tried first. "This is being taken out of context," he said. "These are exploratory notes. We talk to investors all the time, nothing was final." "Page 4, I said. They flipped. On top was the attachment list, my prototype's internal code name, the roadmap I wrote, the cost model I'd spent 3 weekends building. All labeled as Ethan's IP. Collins looked up at him. How'd that label get there? Ethan didn't miss a beat. A clerical error. I almost laughed. Funny how the clerical errors always raise your stock and erase mine. No one smiled. I kept going. Pages 7 through 10, commit logs. You'll see my username on every core build. The next day, the same commits reappear under Ethan's account. Metadata shows they were relabeled, not reauthored. Alex can corroborate. That's when I nodded at the door. Alex stepped in, pale but steady, and set his phone on speaker. He played a recording from a late-night strategy chat with Ethan. Ethan's voice filled the room. Just retag the commits. Mark's not going to last here. Once he's out, no one will care whose name is on the code. Silence. You could hear the air vents. Ethan went red. This is illegal. You can't record. Collins cut him off. State law allows one-party consent. He was the party. He tapped the papers. Keep going, Mark. So I did. Supplier emails with kickback language. A draft contract offering performance bonuses, if certain leadership changes occurred. A message coaching a junior to keep Mark out of the loop, to build a case for incompetence. Ethan's jaw flexed. You're twisting everything. I shrugged. Then twist this. I put down the last page. A timeline. Dates. Deliverables. Who did what. Who took credit. Each square backed by a document. That's when the questions started. Not from me, not from Ethan, but from the board. The lawyer asked about fiduciary duty. Collins asked who actually owned the prototype. Operations wanted to know why morale had tanked in the last quarter. Someone from audit asked Ethan if he'd disclosed any of this as conflicts of interest. He said he had. Audit said he hadn't. The room shifted. You can feel when power moves, like the floor tilts a degree or two and everyone adjusts their stance. Ethan stood. Look, I'm not going to sit here and be defamed in a kangaroo court. If Mark wants to lawyer up, fine. But you all know, I'm the reason clients are still picking up the phone. I kept my eyes on the table. Play the rest, I said to Alex. The recording continued. Ethan again. Board soft. Once I push Mark out, I'll position it as growth. He'll sign a quiet exit if we dangle advisory money. When it ended, nobody moved. Collins spoke first. Ethan, you're suspended from all operational duties, pending an independent investigation. Effective immediately. He turned to me. Mark, you'll act as interim CEO. Keep the trains running. We'll get a third party in here within 72 hours. Ethan laughed, short and ugly. You think you can do this without me? I already have, I said, and finally looked him in the eye. Security wasn't dramatic about it. 2 guys from facilities walked him to his office, waited while he grabbed a laptop. Company property stayed. He didn't look back at me, but I heard him mutter, "This isn't over." Maybe it wasn't. Guys like Ethan don't fold, they scheme. But the boardroom door clicked shut behind him, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. On my way out, Alex caught up to me. You think he's going to come after us? He'll try, I said. So we document everything, we stay clean, and we build. I rode the elevator down alone. My hands finally stopped shaking between floors 12 and 9. When the doors opened to the lobby, marble floors, big glass, the whole corporate cathedral, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not revenge, not yet. Control. Next 72 hours were chaos, but the useful kind. Collins hired a forensic firm, legal lockdown access, HR ran interviews. I parked myself in the war room with Alex and Ops, built a clean plan. Stabilize clients, freeze risky projects, map ownership on every asset. We called 20 key accounts in a day. I didn't pitch, I listened. Folks were spooked, but relieved to hear a straight story. Leadership change, roadmap intact, no service impact. 2 tried to angle for discounts. I gave one a grace month, told the other we'd earn it instead. Both stayed. Ethan didn't go quiet. His lawyer fired off a letter claiming wrongful suspension and intellectual leadership. Cute. PR got a whisper too. A tech blog posted a vague blind item about founder infighting at a Midwest SaaS darling. I wrote a 3-sentence statement. Factual, boring, unquotable. The story died by dinner. Meanwhile, forensics started dropping receipts. Shadow folders on a personal cloud. Draft term sheets. A burner Gmail that funneled investor chatter outside compliance. It wasn't just messy, it was deliberate. Then Friday the elevator opened, and there he was, waiting in the lobby like he still lived here. He smiled. Miss me? Security asked him to leave. He slid a manila envelope across the marble to me. Final offer. Sign the advisory exit, keep your dignity. I didn't touch it, we'll see you after the audit. He leaned close. Audits end. Stories don't. That night, an email hit my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. Subject: You're chasing the wrong trader. That email sat in my inbox like a live wire. No greeting, no signature, just 4 words in the body: check your finance logs. I didn't sleep. At 2 a.m. I logged into our accounting system, scrolling through months of expense sheets and transfer records. At first it looked normal. Vendor payments, payroll, cloud hosting. Then I spotted it. Small but steady wires. $5,000 here, 10 there, always routed through the same shell account in Delaware. And the approver? Not Ethan. It was Diane, our CFO. My stomach twisted. Diane had been with me since year 3. Sharp, calm under pressure. The kind of exec who always had the numbers airtight. She'd backed me when no one else did. If Ethan was betrayal with a knife in the back, this felt like poison in the coffee. Slow, silent, invisible. Next morning I pulled Collins aside. Told him I had something worse than Ethan. He didn't blink. Bring proof. So I dug deeper, called in Alex, asked him to cross-check system logs. We found emails, buried under layers of folder clutter, where Diane had been feeding Ethan financial forecasts. Not just feeding him, coaching him. Position Mark as reckless on spending. Highlight missed targets. Frame Ethan as disciplined. It hit me. Ethan wasn't pulling this coup alone. Diane was his inside line, greasing the numbers, tilting the board's view. That explained the email. Someone wanted me to know. But who? Alex swore it wasn't him. Collins wouldn't risk it. Which meant there was another ghost in the system, watching all of us. And now I had 2 enemies. Once you realize betrayal's coming from 2 directions, the floor tilts under your feet. I couldn't just fight Ethan anymore. I had to figure out why Diane, the one person I thought had my back in finance, was running plays for him. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I watched. Diane was polished as ever. Tailored blazer, neat notes in board meetings, calm voice smoothing over investor nerves. If you didn't know better, you'd think she was holding the place together. But her eyes gave her away. She never looked straight at me anymore. Not once. Alex and I traced those Delaware wires further. Turns out the money didn't stop there. It bounced to Zurich, then into a holding company with one client listed, Ethan Carter Enterprises. I almost laughed. Subtlety clearly wasn't Ethan's strength. I set a trap, quietly asked Diane for a mid-quarter financial snapshot, something routine. While she prepped it, Alex mirrored the system and flagged edits. Sure enough, she massaged the revenue line, shifted expenses into vague consulting categories. The version she handed me sparkled clean. The shadow copy we caught told the real story. She was laundering Ethan's mess. 2 nights later, I asked Collins to meet me off the record. We sat in a corner booth at some diner past midnight, the kind with burnt coffee and pie that tastes like cardboard. I slid him the Zurich docs, Diane's altered reports, and the wire trail. He read in silence, then sighed. Mark, you realize what this means, right? If Ethan and Diane are in bed on this, it's not just internal betrayal, it's securities fraud. The feds get involved. I nodded. Then let's make sure when they come, they know who lit the fire. From that diner meeting on, everything went covert. Collins told me to keep acting normal, show up, run meetings, smile for the clients, while he looped in a discreet audit team. Meanwhile, Alex and I played shadows, pulling logs and backing them up off-site. If Diane or Ethan tried to wipe things, we'd still have the receipts. Diane must have sensed the ground shifting. She started working overtime, locking her office, closing her laptop the second anyone walked by. Twice I caught her in whispered phone calls, voice sharp, sentences cut short the moment she saw me. The weird part? Ethan vanished from the picture. No emails, no surprise lobby visits, not even a rumor. Too quiet. Which meant he was either regrouping or already building his next strike. One morning, Alex rushed into my office, pale. They're moving money again, bigger this time. I checked the file, $500,000 wired out to a Cayman account. Approval code, Diane's. That was it. We couldn't sit on this anymore. Collins called an emergency board session. I walked in with 2 folders, one slim, one thick. Diane sat across the table, calm as ice. She didn't even flinch when Collins said, "We have irregularities that require clarification." I opened the slim folder. This is the version of last quarter's financials Diane provided. Glossy numbers, healthy margins, neat growth. Then, I opened the thick one. This is the shadow version we intercepted. Same files but with the hidden edits exposed. $500,000 routed offshore. Diane's face stayed stone, but her hands gave her away, trembling just enough to see. And then, before anyone could react, she leaned back, crossed her arms and said, "If you think I did this alone, you're dumber than I thought." Just when I thought I knew my enemy, another one showed up. Let me know in the comments if you've ever trusted the wrong person at work. The room froze. Diane didn't blink. "If you think I did this alone, you're dumber than I thought." Collins kept his voice flat. "Then name names." She exhaled, slow and practiced. "Ethan, obviously, but he's not the spine. Vantage's partner Langford is. He promised a bridge round if we cleaned up governance. Translation, sideline Mark. Reframe IP, make Ethan the hero, and I keep my chair with a bigger package." I felt my jaw tighten. "And the offshore wires?" "Retention," she said. "Langford wanted deniability. Ethan wanted trophies. I wanted insulation." Her eyes flicked to me, then away. "I also flagged your spend as reckless, because that's the story Langford needed." Collins looked to legal. "We're in securities territory." Diane nodded once. "I'll cooperate." "Immunity. And I hand you everything. Slack exports, burner emails, calendar invites from a hotel suite Langford used when he flew in. There's a code in the spreadsheets. Gray cells mean hide, blue cells mean restate. You'll find it." Silence hung. You could hear the projector fan. I said, "Turn it over now." She placed a tiny drive on the table. "Encrypted. Legal gets the key once I have terms." Collins called a recess. Legal huddled with her at the far end, voices low. I stared at the window glass, my reflection ghosted over the skyline, and felt that old mix of anger and clarity. This wasn't just betrayal, it was architecture. When we reconvened, Collins spoke. "Diane, you're suspended pending investigation. Counsel will formalize cooperation. Hand over the key." She hesitated, then slid a slip of paper across. "You'll need that within the hour. Langford moves fast." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. An email blast from Ethan to half our client list. Subject line, "Leadership Crisis at Northbridge." He was smearing us, hinting at financial irregularities and irreparable rifts. I drafted a response in 30 seconds. Short, factual, boring, as always. Then I scheduled a live client demo for the morning, full transparency, real numbers, no spin. Another buzz. "Unknown number. The board thinks you've won. Check your servers at midnight." I looked at Collins. "They're not done." He nodded. "Neither are we." Midnight hit, and the office felt like an aquarium. Dark glass, humming servers, blue LEDs breathing. Alex and I were in the war room watching dashboards. At 12:06, alerts spiked. CPU on the auth cluster jumped, then logs started spooling garbage, failed tokens, unknown admin calls, mass permission edits. I said, "That's not Ethan. That's someone with root." Alex swallowed. "Backdoor?" We traced the IP to a rented VPS in Lisbon, then to a hotel network in Chicago, then to nowhere. Typical hopscotch. But the payload gave itself away. It targeted only the repos tied to the prototype and billing. Ethan's fingerprints, just wearing gloves. I pulled the kill switch we'd built after the last scare. Traffic rerouted to a clean mirror, write access froze, and the dirty boxes isolated themselves like they knew they were contagious. Then I texted Collins, "They're inside. We're stable. Call the firm." 5 minutes later, the attacker tried to nuke audit logs. Our decoy logs ate the blast. The real ones, buried on cold storage in a different region, kept writing. Alex whispered, "He's going to panic." I shook my head. "He already is." At 12:21, a new user appeared, Langford_temp. It tried to grant superuser to Diane_archive, then failed. Then tried again using an old API key we'd poisoned. The moment it touched the key, our tracer lit up. "Hotel, floor 12, room 1207. Collins pinged building security. I called a friend at the bureau who'd owed me since a vendor fraud case last year. He didn't ask questions, he just said, 10 minutes. We watched the console go quiet, then flare. One last push to wipe billing. Our mirror held. The attacker killed their session. At 12:33, my phone buzzed. Room secured. A minute after, a second text. 2 guests. 1 ID matches Langford. Silence. Next morning felt like the air before a storm. Bright sky, but heavy pressure you couldn't see. Collins called an emergency board session, this time with 2 federal agents sitting quietly at the end of the table. Nobody said it out loud, but the room carried that weight you only feel when the government shows up. Langford's arrest was already in motion, sealed docket. Diane was out on, quote, cooperation leave, her office stripped bare except for a lonely plant. Ethan was nowhere, but everyone assumed he'd try something noisy soon. I stood up front, no slides, no theatrics, just facts. Our systems are stable. Last night's intrusion was contained. Clients have been notified, no downtime. Revenues intact, we're alive. One agent, gray suit, no name offered, spoke. Alive isn't the bar, clean is. We'll need every log, every email, every contract, touching Vantage Capital. Full disclosure, anyone sitting on skeletons, now's the time. Nobody breathed. Then Collins said Northbridge will cooperate fully. He looked at me, then around the table. But to move forward, we need a leader the market trusts. One name. One face. And I think we all know whose it is. It landed heavy. For a second I thought they might actually balk. Investors don't love drama. But then hands started nodding, murmurs turning into consensus. Ethan had charisma, sure. Diane had numbers. But I was the one who'd kept the lights on, kept the code shipping, kept the clients calm when the walls shook. The motion passed. Interim became permanent. I was CEO. I didn't feel triumph. I felt tired. 10 years of grind, months of betrayal, weeks of war. The chair didn't feel like a throne. It felt like a bunker. And somewhere out there, Ethan was still breathing. We did the client demo like it was open heart surgery. No showmanship, just steady hands. I walked through the roadmap, the rollback plan, the mirror architecture that saved billing last night. Then I opened the floor. People came hard. Are you solvent? Is my data safe? Who's in charge? I answered everyone. No hedging, no buzzwords. By the end, the chat wasn't panicked. It was busy. Busy is good. Busy means they're planning next steps with you, not against you. After, Collins leaned in my doorway. Press wants a quote, I said. Give them a number instead. Uptime, 0 breaches, churn unchanged. He smiled. You hate headlines. I like receipts. By lunch, the tech blog that tried to stir the pot ran a correction. The market didn't clap, but it stopped frowning. I'll take that. At 3 p.m., a courier dropped a flat package on my desk, no return address. Inside, a hotel keycard, a printed screenshot of an admin panel with the user Langford_temp, and a handwritten note. You missed one. No signature. Alex stared at the keycard like it might explode. Another hotel? I flipped the card. Logo read Sable Row, different chain, different part of town. He had help, Alex said. I nodded. Or someone wants us to think so. We ran the keys magstripe at security. Room 1914, checked in under a holding company Ethan had used before. The timestamp on the admin screenshot matched a window right before last night's attack. Collins gathered legal, then glanced at me. You want to call the agents? I looked at the key card, then the skyline. Yeah. But first we go ourselves and we go quiet. At 7:26, we stepped into Sable Row's elevator. My phone buzzed once. Unknown number, 2 words. Don't knock. Room 1914 smelled like old cologne and dust. The door wasn't locked. Keycard slid green, handle turned easy. Too easy. Inside, the curtains were drawn, the bed still made. But the desk told the story. 2 laptops, both powered down but still warm. A prepaid phone in pieces. And a hotel notepad with one word scrawled across 3 pages like a mantra. Control. Alex whispered, look staged. He wasn't wrong. It felt less like someone's workspace, and more like a set designed to rattle us. Collins snapped photos, bagged the phone, then he froze. Mark? I followed his stare. On the nightstand sat a plain white envelope with my name written in block letters. Just, Mark. Hands sweating, I opened it. Inside was a USB stick and a slip of paper. Plug this in and you'll see why Diane folded so fast. We didn't touch it. Straight to the agents. They ran it in a clean box back at the field office. The contents? Emails. Not between Ethan and Diane, between Diane and Langford. But here's the twist. Langford wasn't promising her immunity. He was threatening her, demanding cooked numbers, demanding loyalty, hinting at debts she'd never told us about. Collins muttered, so she wasn't just greedy, she was cornered. Didn't make me forgive her, but it changed the game. Before we could process, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. This time, it wasn't text, it was a video. Ethan's face filled the screen, eyes bloodshot, grin too wide. You really think you won, Mark? You took my chair, you took my board, but you don't have the whole truth. Not yet. Enjoy your new title while it lasts. The clip ended. And for the first time, I wondered if Ethan had something bigger than betrayal up his sleeve. The thing about threats is, they only work when you don't know the shape of them. Ethan's video told me one thing. He had a card I hadn't seen. I called Alex into the war room. What's the one angle we haven't checked? He thought a second. Licensing. If he can claim the prototype violates something upstream, he can nuke valuation. That hit like a brick. Years ago, when I built the first engine, I'd stitched together a bunch of open-source libs, then rewrote half of them until they barely resembled the originals. Clean now, but if Ethan could muddy it, he could scare every investor off. We pulled every repo from day one. I still had thumb drives from the apartment years, labeled with masking tape and dates. We built a provenance map. Commit hashes, authorship, timestamps, license diffs, third-party notices. It looked like a constellation. Messy at first, then unmistakable. At 2 a.m. Alex found it. He's seeding a rumor. Anonymous forum post says Northbridge lifted code from a German firm, Strahlwerk Analytics. I frowned. We've never used their stack. Yeah, but look. He opened a diff Ethan had pushed to one of the decoy boxes last night, right before the raid. It pulled a tiny utility from Strahlwerk's public repo, then buried it under our folder names, like we'd stolen it years ago. He's trying to backdate theft, I said. He plants it, screenshots it, claims we cleaned it later. We needed a counterpunch that wasn't just denial. I called Collins, then the agents. By morning, we had sworn statements from early contributors, notarized archives from our code escrow, and a third-party audit firm ready to timestamp the chain. At noon, Ethan went live on a podcast, coy as ever. I can't say much, but there are serious IP issues at Northbridge. I waited until he finished, then published the provenance map. No adjectives, just receipts, signed hashes, escrow certs, the exact commit that proved the planted code came from last night's IP address in that hotel. The hosts posted an update within an hour. Ethan didn't. Now I knew the shape of his threat. Now it was gone. By the next week, the storm outside was dying down. Clients calmed, press got bored, investors stopped asking if we were about to implode. But inside, I knew Ethan wasn't finished. Guys like him don't fade. They reload. And sure enough, he reappeared. Not in person this time, but through whispers. Recruiters started calling my engineers with suspiciously generous offers. Same firms, same language. Come work on something revolutionary. One dev told me straight out, the guy on the other end didn't give his name, but he sounded familiar. Ethan was building again, in the shadows. Collins said, ignore him, he's radioactive now. But I couldn't. He'd tried fraud, sabotage, smears. Now he was poaching my people. If he got even 2 or 3 of our best, he could clone enough of the engine to launch a rival. So I flipped the script, quietly gathered the team in the break room. No slides, no pep talk, just truth. You've all heard the noise. If anyone wants out, no hard feelings. But if you're staying, we build harder, faster, cleaner than ever. And no secrets. If Ethan calls you, you tell me. They nodded. Some nervous, some angry, some fired up. But nobody left. Then Alex raised his hand. What if we feed him something? The room went quiet. He explained. Plant a shiny fake branch in the repo. Not junk, but bait. Something tempting enough to lure Ethan's spies. A new architecture sketch, a fake benchmark, all wrapped in just enough code to look real. Collins grinned. You want to run a sting? I thought about it. Dangerous, yeah. But so was letting Ethan keep striking from the dark. I finally said, let's give him a gift he can't resist. We called it Project Honeytrap. Alex built the skeleton, a repo branch labeled Vanguard_core, tucked behind the same permissions Ethan had already sniffed at. Inside, we planted a white paper draft with flashy claims, 60% faster scaling, predictive load balancing, Buzzwords layered thick enough to make investors drool. The code was real enough to compile, but worthless in practice. Loops that spun forever, functions that ate memory like candy. Then we waited. 3 days later, Alex pinged me at midnight. He bit. Sure enough, the honey trap branch lit up in the logs. Someone had cloned it, using credentials tied to one of the engineers Ethan had been courting. Poor kid swore he never touched it, which meant Ethan had gotten his hands on leaked access. Classic. Within 48 hours, a new shell company popped up in Delaware, Vanguard Systems, LLC. If you're enjoying how the tables are turning, hit that subscribe button, because this is where the trap finally snaps shut. Same buzzwords, same benchmarks, straight from our fake branch. Ethan had slapped a new name on our bait and started pitching. Collins laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. He just gift-wrapped you a federal case. We called the agents, handed over the logs, the branch history, the Delaware filing. It was textbook IP theft. Except this time the IP was garbage we'd designed to trace him. 2 weeks later, headlines dropped. Former tech exec faces fraud, wire theft charges. His mugshot wasn't flattering. Hair wild, eyes flat. That smirk finally gone. When I showed the article to the team, there wasn't cheering, just relief. One of the engineers muttered, "Maybe now we can just work." But me? I couldn't shake Ethan's last words on that video. You don't have the whole truth. Not yet. If this was his final play, it was sloppy. Too sloppy. Which meant maybe, just maybe, there was still another layer I hadn't seen. Ethan in cuffs should have felt like the end. But that note in the hotel, "You missed one," kept buzzing in my head. I went back to the beginning. Day 0 docs. Incorporation. First contractor agreements. The ugly stack of scanned forms from a WeWork printer that jammed every third page. Around midnight, I found it. An early IP assignment I'd signed the year we closed our seed. My signature? There. The counter-signature from our counsel? There. But there was a missing exhibit. Schedule B. The list of pre-existing code I retained personally before assigning improvements to the company. Without that list, someone could argue the foundational engine never formally moved over. Not theft. Ambiguity. The kind Ethan could spin into a grenade. I called Collins. If Langford found this, he could claim the company doesn't fully own the core. Collins groaned. He'd try to weaponize it. In a sale, it'd slash valuation. In a fight, it'd stall you in court. I dug deeper. In an old email thread, our first lawyer had flagged the missing exhibit and asked for a clean re-execution later. Then he left the firm. Nobody followed up. So that was the whole truth Ethan dangled, not some bombshell crime, an old paper cut with the power to bleed us out. We fixed it before dawn. I documented provenance again, had every early contributor execute confirmatory assignments, and signed a fresh, notarized transfer that listed each pre-existing module by hash. We filed it same day, timestamped, certified, escrowed. Alex whistled. If Ethan was betting on a paperwork hole, you just paved it in concrete. Good, I said. I'm done playing defense. That afternoon, I stood in front of the team. No more shadows, no more surprises. We're publishing a transparency page. Governance, audits, code provenance, roadmap. If we make a mistake, we'll say it fast and fix it faster. They didn't cheer. They just nodded, like people who finally felt the ground stop moving. For the first time since this started, I believed it might actually hold. Transparency worked better than I expected. Clients loved it. Charts, audit seals, even screenshots of commit hashes. Northbridge isn't hiding, one investor told me. That's rare. Employees relaxed too. For the first time in months, people were talking about features instead of fallout. But peace always feels temporary when you've lived in war. And sure enough, a week later, Ethan's name popped up again. Not in the news, not in the courts, but in whispers. A recruiter friend called me. Weird thing, Mark. Got a pitch deck in my inbox from some London outfit, Phoenix Analytics, but the slides? They look familiar. He sent it over. Different logo, British address, but the design language was ours. Even some screenshots, except cropped, blurred, just enough to make it look like their own. Ethan's fingerprints all over it. I should have been angry. Instead, I laughed. The guy was consistent, always reaching, always sloppy. But then page 8 made my smile fade. It wasn't code, it wasn't tech, it was names. Key engineers, Ops leads, even Collins, a target list. Alex leaned over my shoulder. That's not just poaching, that's a raid plan. Collins shook his head. London jurisdiction complicates it. He'll set up a shell there, claim he's clean, and fish from across the ocean. I closed the laptop. Then we don't wait for him to raid. We show the industry exactly who he is. Next morning, we launched a public case study. Not marketing fluff, just the whole ugly story. Redacted docs, dates, attack logs, court filings. Headline: How Not to Build a Company, Lessons from a Betrayal. The blog blew up. Some people called it brutal, others called it brave. But everyone read it. By nightfall, Phoenix Analytics was trending. Not as a rival, but as Ethan's latest scam. Recruiters ghosted him. Investors blacklisted him. Still, when I shut my laptop, one thought lingered. Snakes don't vanish because you shame them. They shed their skin and wait. 3 months later, Northbridge felt alive again. Clients were steady, revenue climbing, engineers actually smiling in hallways. For once, the company looked like what I'd dreamed a decade ago. But Ethan was still out there. His name had gone radioactive in the valley, but people like him don't die. They morph. And sure enough, a tip slid into my inbox from a contact in Berlin. He's pitching under an alias, calls himself Adrian Cole. I almost admired the nerve. New city, new name, same tricks. But this time I wasn't chasing him. I had bigger work, building what he could never fake: trust. We launched 2 new products that quarter, both hitting targets. Investors leaned back in, this time backing me, not some slick smile in a suit. Collins pushed for a celebration, but I skipped it. Truth? Winning didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like quiet, like finally breathing without checking over my shoulder. One night, I stayed late in the office, just me and the skyline. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, again. I hesitated, then picked up. Silence at first. Then a voice I knew too well, tired and cracked. Ethan. You won, Mark. Board, company, all of it. But you know what? Without me, you'll never push big. You'll play it safe. You'll fade. I didn't answer, just let him talk. I made you sharper. Don't forget that. When you sit in that chair, look in the mirror. You'll see me too. Do you think he was right? Or was my survival the ultimate revenge? Let me know below. The line clicked dead. I stared out at the city. He wasn't wrong. I was sharper. Not because of him, but because betrayal teaches you things success never does. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't revenge anymore. It was survival, and it was mine. A year later, Northbridge wasn't just alive, it was thriving. Revenue doubled, clients expanded, engineers stuck around because they wanted to, not because they were afraid to leave. We weren't the scrappy underdog anymore. We were the company people pointed to when they talked about resilience. The boardroom where Ethan once smirked across the table was different now. Not quieter, better, focused. No whispered conspiracies, no knife under the handshake. Just work. One afternoon, Collins slid a folder across my desk. Thought you'd want to see this. Inside were clippings. Ethan, now Adrian Cole, busted in a London court for fraud. Barred from serving as a director for 10 years. Diane testified against him, traded her cooperation for a reduced sentence. Langford? Still tied up in trials, his empire crumbling. I closed the folder. That chapter's over. Collins smiled. Only if you let it be. And he was right. Betrayal doesn't vanish. It leaves scars, reminders you carry into every deal, every handshake, every late-night email. But scars aren't just pain, they're proof you survived. That night, I walked the floor. Engineers huddled over whiteboards, ops juggling calls, designers sketching ideas on glass walls. The hum of building, not fighting. It felt new. I thought of Ethan's last words. You'll see me in the mirror, maybe I would. But I'd also see the people who stayed, the work that endured, the company that refused to break. At the end of the hall, the city lights stretched out forever. For once, I didn't feel hunted. I felt steady. And maybe that was the real revenge. Not headlines, not takedowns, not even justice in court. Just the simple, stubborn fact that I was still here. And he wasn't.